Okay, so welcome everyone to day 3 of Longevity Week. My name is Julia Randell-Khan from the Encore Fellows organisation, and we're delighted to be supporting the Longevity Forum with their theme of discussions around Longevity Week of sustainability in a decade of healthy ageing. And with the recent COP26 discussions, we have the perfect opportunity for our panel today to look at the intersection of longevity, the environment, and social entrepreneurship. And so I'm going to be introducing the panel shortly, but just by way of context, for longevity, we're talking about the whole of lifespan, so the whole of life, so the measure of long life, and the quality of a healthy, good quality, longer life is going to be affected by all sorts of interconnected factors, as you can imagine, from education to work to financial security, climate, health, environment, and intergenerational relationships. And it's this web of sort of complex interconnecting factors which will all contribute to a healthy, longer life and overall longevity. And obviously climate and environmental change is going to make it increasingly harder for humans to, our species, as it were, to survive and thrive. And so what role, our question is really today, what role can social entrepreneurship play in these changes that we will need to make to support the quality and health of longer lives for all of us? And so we've got 3 panelists today who have got great expertise in different areas to have this discussion. So Sergio Serapiao from Sao Paulo in Brazil, welcome. Sergio was actually in his 30s when he started talking to older people, sort of get to know elders in Brazil by, I think, inviting people for coffee. Is that right, Sergio? And you really realize that there is this huge talent to tap into in terms of older people contributing to the economic and to be able to work in different ways using that talent. And so you founded, Sergio founded Lab 60 and Labora Tech to create sort of an age diverse gig economy for tapping the talents of older people and opportunities for working in different ways. And so 10 years later, I think people are still meeting at the cafes that you set up, the Café Com Vida, so coffee with life in cities throughout Brazil. And Sergio is also an Ashoka Fellow, which is a tremendous recognition of his social entrepreneurship venture. And I think Labora Tech now has over 20,000 members in its community throughout Brazil, and is also a B Corp in Brazil, which I think we'll touch on as a mechanism for this kind of work. So Marie, so welcome, Sergio. And Marie Conley Smith.
Thank you.
Marie Conley Smith, colleague from the Stanford Center on Longevity from a different part of the world in California. And one of Marie's roles, important roles, is to lead the annual International Student Design Challenge, which is promoting young social entrepreneurs design products and services that will really improve well-being across the lifespan. So touching on many of those interconnected factors that I explained at the beginning in terms of what we mean by longevity. And this year's design challenge is all about longevity-ready environments. And Marie, you've been leading this design challenge for, I think, over 9 years now. Is that right?
That's right. This is our ninth challenge.
Yeah. Ninth challenge. And in addition to that work, Marie's also involved in the Centre on Longevity's really important research programme on the new map of life, which Marie will explain a bit more to us, and in fact today announced some important developments in relation to that map of life project. So welcome, Marie.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Mick Smyer. Mick, based in the US, but very kindly joining us from central Italy today. So we've got a very international panel. I'm based in London, and Mick is the founder of a social entrepreneurship organization called Growing Greener: Climate Action for a Warming World. And Mick, I think you mentioned you've had at least sort of 3, maybe 4 careers, and you've actually come to social entrepreneurship later in life. But Mick's organization really moves people from anxiety to action on climate change, but in a very interdisciplinary way, sort of using communication communication strategies, gerontology, human-centered design in the resources and materials that Mick is now using internationally and intergenerationally as we focus on the important topic of climate change. And Mick's illustrious career includes being a provost, being an emeritus professor of psychology at Bucknell University in the US. He's also a senior fellow in social innovation at Babson College in the US and a former Encore Public Voices Fellow, which is actually how I was introduced to Mick through the Encore organization. And I just briefly have sort of joined Mick in sort of later life as a social entrepreneur, having launched the Encore Fellows program, which brings people at the retirement stage to opportunities to work in social sector organizations. And then most recently, having launched the Purpose Exchange, which is around providing people opportunities for purposeful thinking about what we're calling non-retirement, and also involvement in social change action, of which environment and climate is so important. So that's our introductions. I hope you agree that we've got a tremendous range of expertise to draw on for our discussion. We're going to focus first of all on the theme of longevity, then move on to talking about the environment topic, particularly with the intergenerational angle, given that we are looking at longevity across the lifespan. And then we're going to come to the impact of social entrepreneurship. So on the theme of longevity, everyone knows we have aging populations around the world. We have more people over 65 now than under 5. So we have to look at structural ways to sort of change the way that we live and that we work. And the Centre on Longevity's new map of life work addresses all of these issues from an interdisciplinary perspective. So Marie, if I could ask you to give us sort of an overview of what you're doing on that project and also some of the latest developments.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I'm really excited to be able to talk about the new map of life today. As you said, it's an exciting day for the new map, and it's essentially now the framework around which we think about longevity and longer lives at the Center on Longevity. It began 3 years ago, and it began with a question of, if people are going to be routinely living to be 100 plus years old, what about our society needs to change so that every person has the opportunity to age with good health and meaning and purpose? And as you sort of already mentioned in the background to this question, I think most people on this will be familiar with, is that over the last century, we saw the largest increase in human lifespan that humanity has ever seen before. But it happened so rapidly that our way of life really hasn't had time to catch up. We've sort of had this way of doing things that usually goes school for the first 18 to 22 years of life, and then an intense period of work and child rearing in midlife, and retirement somewhere in the mid-60s. We might call this kind of the existing map of life. And it's sort of this linear path that has really little to no wiggle room in which to add all of the extra years that we've gained. So what's functionally happened is that the extra years sort of just get tacked on at the end of life and are treated almost as an afterthought. So the Center on Longevity, led by our founding director, Professor Laura Carstensen, we set out to figure out what a new map of life might look like. So we started by going through this process of sort of paring down, what's essentially all of life to a set of domains that are integral to a long and healthy life, and importantly for us, in which we think that we have the most opportunity to really impact change. So we landed on a set of 9 domains, which I won't list all of, but they include aspects from the entire lifespan, from early childhood and work and school, how we manage our health, both from a healthcare perspective and sort of individual lifestyle, and pertinent to today, how we build and impact the world that we live in, both the built environment and the climate. So we hired research fellows who specialize in each of those 9 areas. They spent 2 years identifying the current state of their field and ideas of where we need to go and what needs to change in their sector. And we just released a report this morning. This is the news that we're all hinting at. That's sort of a culmination of the fellows' work and what we've learned so far. So I encourage you all to check it out. I think we're putting a link to it in the chat. But one of the main takeaways from this work so far, I think, is that we need to do away with, the linear existing map of life that's essentially, a single path and move to something that's more like a network of roads, that may allow for a turn away from work in midlife when child rearing, or an on-ramp back into education when a career change is needed. There's really so much opportunity for innovation across all these domains, from creating more opportunities for lifelong learning and figuring out ways to create intergenerational connections, improving wearable technology for health monitoring, creating energy efficient heat mitigation to keep people safe as our planet warms, barring significant reversal of climate change, of course. There's already people working in these spaces, I think, but there's really room for so much more. The need to design for healthy longevity is really only growing.
Yeah. Thank you, Maria. I think that's a fabulous sort of introduction to the huge range of work that's going on. And I know Laura's put a link in the chat, so I'd really encourage people to have a look at that when you can. And Mick, if I could come to you, because obviously this change is going to require behavior change as we think about new ways of working and living generally. From your perspective and from a psychology perspective, what do we need to focus on when we're thinking about how we shift behavior for these fundamental life and cultural changes that we're looking at here?
Well, first of all, Julia, thank you for having me on the panel. I'm enjoying being here. I think part of what we're talking about is what's the story we tell ourselves about long life. I've recently been teaching first-year students at universities, and we do a segment on aging, because I say to them, I can guarantee there are two things you're going to encounter both personally and professionally in your life. One is aging and one is climate change. And they don't want to talk about either one. But when we start talking about aging, I ask them, first of all, how old is old? And what are their images of old age? And their images of old age are primarily negative, and it starts relatively young. And yet, when I ask them to think about what might the lifespan look like if you were to live to be 100, how might you view old age if you think old age is going to be 80, 90, 100 instead of 55, 60, 65? And what are the implications of the story you tell yourself? Then we have a very rich conversation, because we know from research that your own expectations about aging actually affect your aging, both cognitively, in terms of mental status, but also in terms of physical health. So the story we tell ourselves about aging is an important place to start, I think.
No, absolutely. And I think this probably plays out, Sergio, in the sort of exploratory work that you did when you were designing Lab 60 Plus and then onto Labora Tech. You had to understand the story that older people were telling themselves, and then you were then able to sort of unlock this talent. Can you tell us a little bit more about the model of Labora Tech, because you really are sort of a case study of this in action, and how you're capturing this talent and how the program is operating?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with you guys. Well, all this started a long time ago. In 2004, I started doing some projects. Up to 2014, I started Lab 60 Plus, which now is a movement. And maybe the main idea that we brought, that it was fresh, was that aging is as good as to be old is as good as to be young. I mean, there are different strengths that we get into life going through the years of life, and there are some needs that we have in all different phases of life. And this is much different around the mindset that we have. We have the mindset of this youth-centric culture that as I go further and further from my 30s, I get worse and worse, right? And then we just discovered that, no, I can be wiser. I can start 3 careers, the 3rd career, as Mick has proved us here. So we have just to understand what are our strengths in each phase of our life and what is our weakness, our piece to development. And we had this feeling, and then we started to call people, and people started to show up with their different strengths that we did not have mapped, but they just presented themselves. So the projects started to grow among collaboration in between people and organizations. Startups have developed, and incredible projects have gone into real life. And seeing all that, I said, wow, there is something that it's kind of we have to wear a different glasses to see this, because people have these glasses of the youth, and people are not seeing all this strength that we have all around, and it is still growing. The only part of population that grows are the 50 plus, and we just put them apart. So by understanding that, I said, okay, we need to connect them at scale and now in the most important challenge that we have as society and as companies. So we started Labora to do that. So Labora, it's a startup which recognizes all these strengths. So we do not, what we understood, as Mary said, is that all this culture is so strong that we put all this understanding about aging into our processes and into our organizations. So how we hire people, there is a bias of ageist. So we need to go out of that. So Labora, what does? We invite people, senior people, 50 plus people, into a digital community. People arrive, and we give like, okay, you are welcome here. Here it's a place to you to restart a new profession, start a new hobby, start a new phase of your life. We call second phase of your professional life. So there is this community that people are embraced, and a lot of reskilling courses are put on available to them for free. And through different paths that they take, we recognize as with our technology, what are their soft skills and hard skills. And by doing that, not seeing curriculum, not having interviews, because this is all, there is a lot of ageism over there. We understand who's ready for what, and then we polish a little skills over there, get a little better, and then we put them in new jobs, in jobs that really are the greatest demands of our nowadays. And so we help companies and society with the senior power that it's needs to be undercovered. So that's how we're dealing with that.
Well, I mean, it's a huge endeavor. Congratulations on what you've achieved. I think there's a lot there that we can draw on as we kind of move on to really focusing on the environment, particularly as we think about the intergenerational connections and the importance of that. I mean, COP26, the voice of the youth was so prevalent. And Mick, and if I could come to you, because your organization, Growing Greener, is really focused on climate action, emerging climate action leaders. And, I'm interested to hear from you in terms of how you're bringing the generations together around this topic, and how Growing Greener started, and explain to us a bit more about sort of the journey of Growing Greener and where you are now on this topic.
Sure. Well, I was a latecomer to the environmental movement. My own climate journey really started in 2005. Why 2005? Well, I was born and raised in New Orleans. And in 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated my hometown. And although I wasn't living there at the time, watching my hometown and the destruction after Katrina was a wake-up call for me about the impacts of extreme weather events and the broader pattern of climate change. And then my own journey accelerated about 5 years ago with the birth of twin grandsons, Bailey and Gus, best-looking grandkids, until their cousin Teddy arrived, and then their little brother Rowan. So what do these goofballs have to do with climate change? Well, it's easy for me now to envision the world that I'm leaving them and what the world will be like in 65 short years when they're my age.
Yeah.
And so now that's a real motivation for me. So that's how I got really started with the climate issues. And I really started out at Stanford. I was lucky enough to have a sabbatical after being provost at Bucknell. And I spent time in the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences and in the design school at Stanford, really asking a simple question: how do we connect two global patterns, population aging and climate change? And at the time, I thought, well, I'll just join the hundreds of people who are looking to older adults to be not only victims of climate change, but potential leaders of climate action. And after I talked to all 6 of those people, I realized there actually weren't a lot of people who saw older adults as a resource on climate change. And that's really what I started to work on. But when I started to work, I actually started at the other end of the lifespan because I looked to some work from the National Academy of Sciences in the United States about how to talk to kids about climate change. And they said, if you want to have that conversation, keep it social, short, and positive. Social by focusing on people or places you care about. Short by focusing on a human scale time frame like 40 to 50 years. And positive, making sure that you leave people with a clear next step that they can take. And it struck me that those communication principles could also apply to older adults. And that's what I started doing in the design school at Stanford. And while I was there, I developed a set of materials to begin to engage people and move them from anxiety to action. Because we have what I call either a climate silence or a climate avoidance habit. In the United States, 73% of people say, yes, climate change is happening, it's real. But only 1/3 ever talk with their family members or friends about it. So we have this disconnect because I think, again, the story we tell ourselves is climate change. Whoa, it's so big, what can one person do? It makes me anxious just to think about it. So I'm not going to think or talk about it. So we've developed approaches that help you break that cycle, break that habit of climate avoidance. And I started out working with older adults in community groups, in lifelong learning institutes, in retirement communities. And then I've worked my way down the lifespan to college students, to high school and middle school students, and to elementary school students, using the same basic approaches to show them how to move ahead on climate change. I can tell you more about that, Julia, but that's basically been my journey.
Yeah. So social, short, and positive.
Yes.
I like that. Very, very clear. I think there's a lot we can all take from that, actually, in terms of thinking about our own action on climate change. And I know that Laura's putting some links to your materials and resources in the chat. So again, very accessible materials that we can all take use of.
Right. We've used these materials, as you said, in several countries, in several states within the United States, with thousands of people of all ages.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. So, I mean, Marie, coming to you, back to you. I mean, intergenerational, attracting younger entrepreneurs into this space. Tell us a bit more about the current theme for the Centre on Longevity's Design Challenge, which is all about the built environment. So tell us more about that.
It is, yeah. And as you already mentioned, the Design Challenge is a student competition for undergraduate and graduate students from around the world. It's a global challenge. And I do like to say students, I mean, it is typically, mostly young people, but we are welcoming and encouraging of students of all ages. Stanford's got the Distinguished Careers Institute, so everyone is welcome to participate. And the way it works is that we put forth a different longevity-related theme every year. We've had a pretty wide span of them. They've been designing for aging in place, designing for intergenerational relationships. But this year is all about designing for longevity-ready environments. And we were really inspired by the work of our New Map of Life fellows in this area, both Cheng-Hao Wang, who is the Climate Fellow, and Diego Sierra, who worked with us, who is the Built Environment Fellow. And they have been working with our director, Laura Carstensen, and with Rob Jackson, who is with the Stanford Woods Institute. They actually all have a paper coming out in Nature Aging this month that's really working to reshape the narrative, growing it from one that's about building an environment that is age-friendly to one that is longevity-ready. And of course, longevity-ready is, inclusive of age-friendly, which typically refers to designing for growing old and all the changes, both physical and cognitive, that occur along with that. But longevity ready is really about building an environment that's conducive to healthy aging from even before birth, so that people throughout their lives are healthier and thus arrive at old age in a much better place. And I don't think I need to, expound upon why, we're seeing that the intensity of the environmental impact is really becoming increasingly clear. But, pregnant women who are exposed to airborne toxins are more likely to have premature births. Children who are exposed to green spaces, that's been shown to enhance cognitive development. The temperature, heat has been associated with poorer mental health in adults. And these climate extremes are also worse for people who are economically disadvantaged.
Yeah.
They typically have fewer resources for mitigation, and they often, in the first place, live in areas that are, affected worse. They're more polluted, they're hotter,
exactly.
less tree canopy. This year is all about designing both for the built environment and the climate and how those two things interact. I'd say we've been getting a lot of enthusiasm about it so far. I think we're at about 85.
We have a couple of your judges on our panel today.
That's right. Yes,
Sergio and Mick, which is fantastic.
Yeah, they'll be helping us decide our finalists. So thank you both.
And I think if anyone watching today is involved in the university sector, please get in touch with Marie at the centre, because we're really keen to promote this opportunity around universities around the world. Yes. And I know it's very international already, but I've certainly been doing it in the UK. But anyone who's listening, who's got contacts and would like to promote this, maybe to your alumni or just generally. That would get us a rich diversity of views and experiences. But I mean, I know you, Sergio, you actually promoted, I think, some of Brazilian students in one of the competitions. But what I particularly like to come to is your work on sustainability agenda with corporates in Brazil. And I know that I think it was in some older people were coming in to actually look at the production of cocoa, I think, and actually thinking about how their involvement in working with local people on the production processes actually was beneficial for environmental change. And I just wonder if you could, again, sort of practically talk about the example there of seeing this in action, but with a corporate agenda as well.
Sure. One of the key things that we understood is that since our path into life has changed, our path into careers has changed. So we should understand that we will restart our careers many times. Right. So instead of having only one going up one mountain linear as we thought would be our career, nowadays it's like going into the Andes or into Rocky Mountains, right? It's up and down, and then you train and you study and go up again, right? But the important thing is the companies to be ready for that. Right. So we still have organizations that the entry level people think about the youth only. Why only the youth? Why couldn't be someone in the 60s or in the 70s to restart a new career, right? And start in the entry level. So that's exactly what we have been focusing. So, but to do that, sure, we have to take care of all the careers that this person has had before, right? The moment of life. And one great thing is what brights his or her eye. So what motivates him or her, right? So his or her purpose gets more and more important as we go in our years, right? So we do not want to waste our time. We want to be connected to the subjects that really we wish to spend our hours. So this is key to connect people into corps and into key issues of society. So just to give an example, we have partnered with the largest Brazilian bank to seniors to go into the bank agencies, the banks, to them to teach other seniors how to use the mobile bank. why these people would do that? Not only to have a job, but to teach financial education to other people, right? To really help them to digitalize. So it's more than just, okay, how many customers have you answered, but how have you changed someone's life? And so we could do that for all other the things that people get connected. So another example was senior people want to get connected to kids. Okay, so let's put, so we did a partnership with schools. So to senior people to talk to high school students, to them not to leave school. There is a great problem here in Brazil because in high school, many kids leave school because they need to work, they need to do other things, so they're disconnected with education. So they don't need psychologists, they don't need teachers, they have all that, but they need someone who's senior enough to speak to them and say, okay, what's life about, right? Let's do not leave school, right? Get connected to it. So so for this senior, this is a connection to the youth, youth generation. And we could do that with environment as well. So an example that we have with that is a project that we did with a B Corp in Taiwan. We had a technology on how to measure exactly what we were spending real time in electricity, in energy, in-house, right? So they put this plug into the system of the house, and they would measure. And then this couple, this senior person and this young girl would go around the neighborhood, and they would be like the guardians of the environment. So they would actually see how you are spending a little bit more than your neighbor. Why you're doing that? So it's like developing your citizenship and your ability to talk to people that seniors have much more listening, deep listening, and connected to your purpose, which is let's change the world by helping the climate change. So this is something that we think that is really important to anyone to reconnect to work, and to companies to reframe what's the job positions. Job positions are not really connected to purpose, especially the first entry levels. So that's what we are doing. So connecting first level positions with purpose and getting to seniors to do the job with the youth.
Sorry. I think they're great examples of how you're kind of rethinking and shaking up, the world of work. And you've given some good examples there in terms of the environment, in terms of rethinking how you can use people's life skills for getting the message across. I think that's absolutely right. And when we think about, social entrepreneurship, I mean, you are running you and Mick are both running, social entrepreneurship ventures. I mean, if we look at that sort of topic of social entrepreneurs and sort of you talked about the movement building that we're seeing, particularly as we look at innovations in longevity and more generally. And I wondered whether you are thinking or aware of different practices, good practices, the impact that your kind of work is having in particularly on the environment or climate with Mick's area, Sergio, in your area in terms of tapping talent. But Mick, I mean, if you could perhaps comment on this as a social entrepreneur and the impact that Growing Greener is having, and sort of what your future ambition is as a social entrepreneur in this space, because we're very much looking at topics around generational equity, looking at entrepreneurship in later life. There's a lot of points here, I think, to bring together as we look at the impact and the value of supporting social entrepreneurs, as we look at all the shifts that have got to be made for our healthy, longer lives. What's your thinking on that?
Sure. Well, Julia, I think in the environmental space for social entrepreneurship, my message is pretty simple. I just recently wrote a blog post on Psychology Today called "After Glasgow, Pay It Forward." It
Right.
seems to me particularly older adults have both an opportunity and a responsibility to pay it forward in the environmental space. Why? Well, first of all, older adults have time, talent, and a motivation to be thinking about future generations. If we ask older adults one simple question, which the psychologist Lisa Zaval has looked into from a research perspective, it turns out if you ask this simple question, how do you want to be remembered? That, just asking that question, motivates older adults, actually adults of any age, to get more involved in climate. It changes their climate opinion and their climate behavior. So, but older adults are especially primed for that because of where we are in the life cycle. But having time, talent, and motivation is the start. But it seems to me that we also have a responsibility to pay it forward by listening, first of all, to younger adults. Recent research from the University of Bath, for example, suggests that 60% of young adults say they feel dismissed or ignored when they try to raise climate issues. But listening is the first step. But the second step is acting, taking action on climate issues in whatever your sphere of influence or circle of influence is, whether it's your family, your community, or other places. But then the third is, I think we have a responsibility to pay it forward by sharing our hope for the future with young adults. Now, for some of us, that means social entrepreneurship. Brian Stevens calls hope our superpower. Because hope is what makes people stand up when others are sitting down. Well, that makes sense. But how do we do that? Well, for some of us, that means entrepreneurship. We know that the most successful entrepreneurs are those over 50. Elizabeth Eisel has done some really interesting work on entrepreneurship in middle and late life. And it turns out that older adults are able to use that time, talent, and experience to launch entrepreneurship. And increasingly in the social entrepreneurship space, we find older adults being active with younger adults, for example, and adults of any generation. For example, in my climate work, when I talk about intergenerational work, I'm of an age where the intergenerational work includes young adults who are in college, but it also includes people in their 30s and 40s who are teachers. I'm working with college teachers who are working with college students. I'm working with grade school teachers who are working with young children. Recently, I worked with 2 fifth grade teachers in Shreveport, Louisiana, and they reached 200 children with our materials to begin the climate conversation and get those children moving on climate action in their local communities. I never saw those 200 children, but I worked with their teachers, and through that 1-hour intervention with them, we were able to leverage that time and effort. So I think when we think about social entrepreneurship by older adults and intergenerational work, it's not solely the younger generation, but it could be middle-aged generation, because to me, that's a younger generation, right? In addition to young adults and to children.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's a great perspective to have, Mick. And I think certainly, the conversations and the action that we saw around COP26, and is there this sort of generational conflict? But I think what you're saying is that there isn't, and certainly Professor Bobby Duffy from King's, and his work around generations demonstrate that it is a myth, and that there is a common interest.
Right. We know that young adults are more concerned than older adults about climate issues, but that doesn't mean older adults are not concerned. And so when you ask, what are we doing in Gray and Green and what are we looking for? We're looking for partners, organizational partners who are interested in using our materials and our approaches to move both groups and individuals from anxiety to action on climate change. And those individuals could be young adults, could be middle-aged adults, with the common theme that they understand that keeping it social, short, and positive can move people ahead and groups ahead on climate action.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm just sort of segueing on the sort of the social, short, and positive. What I'd like to do is invite Marie just to introduce we're going to show a short video of one of the finalists from the design challenge, which I think goes to Mick's point about, the impact that a very short message can have. So Marie, do you want to set that up for us? And then I'll come back to you, Sergio, in terms of bringing your perspective in too.
Yeah, so I would have loved to have shared more about, what's going to come out of this year. But as I said, we're in the middle of the submission process.
Yes.
But I will also plug check in with us on January 26th, because that's when we'll be announcing the finalists from the longevity ready environments. But instead today we'll show a clip from last year's finals. This is a team who designed for last year's theme, which was called After the Pandemic, Designing the Next Version of Our World. And it was all about taking inspiration from the huge cultural shift that was happening during the pandemic and designing something that would, help make long lives better. So as you can imagine, we saw a lot of designs around work and school and intergenerational relationships and how to help those flourish at a time when we had to do so entirely remotely. So this team is called NEAR, and they were inspired by the difficulty of communicating with family during the pandemic. And so they wanted to help families get connected with technology, and then also help particularly the older adults in the family grow comfortable and knowledgeable in using that technology. So we can check them out.
Great, thanks, Marie. I think, Laura, you're going to launch that for us.
We've got our coffees and we're off to our visit up to a retirement community in Northern Illinois.
Awesome. Hello.
Here we go.
There's a common thread of our interviews that we learned that a lot of people, I think in principle, really want to age at home, but it's almost impossible. We have found a lot of technologies specifically designed for seniors, but none of the family members that we interviewed actually used those devices at all.
One of the things that inspired me to pitch that concept was an experience when I was back home this summer, visiting my grandma who's in an assisted living facility. I was actually announcing my engagement, and we spent about the first 15 minutes trying to explain to her nursing staff how to use speakerphone on a cell phone. And it just felt a little bit ridiculous that it's 2020 and that was that big of a hurdle and a challenge for us to just be able to talk through a pane of glass.
I lost my grandfather last year, and my grandmother has been quite lonely for the past year. So the joy of teaching her how to download WhatsApp, and now when I came back, she called me over WhatsApp video call. So the joy was another level altogether. Like, I can't express it.
Social isolation and loneliness aspect of what something like NEAR can provide is super important. And if we can, be something that allows a family to be brought together in a new way, we would love to, to do that.
Great.
I can give a quick where are they now?
Yeah, where are they now, Laura?
Yeah.
Where are they now, Marie?
They are doing very well. They're currently expanding their business. They're adding team members. And they operate 6 tech stands at 6 different retirement communities in Chicago, helping people get comfortable using technology, both for things like, booking health appointments, but also, communicating with their families.
Okay, fabulous. No, thank you. Well, I hope that gave everyone watching a sort of an idea of the type of longevity innovations that are being supported and promoted through the Design Challenge. I think it was a great example. But before we get on to talking more about sort of the impact, which I would like to come back to, Laura, are there any questions that has come through from anyone? Because we can't see, we're on a Zoom link, so we can't actually see if anything's come through.
Yes. So what is the greatest challenge of aging today?
That's a big question. Who would like to go for Mick? Why don't you go for that one first?
Sure. Well, I guess I would reframe it just a little bit, because I think the greatest challenge that we're facing is that we're simultaneously facing 2 challenges: aging in an era of climate change. And this resonates both at the individual and societal level. If we think about, for example, China, at the societal level, they are simultaneously a rapidly aging society trying to adjust to climate change and the economic and energy demands of that. The United States, in contrast, has had the benefit of aging first and now trying to adapt to climate change. But the same is true at the individual level. For example, we can think about longevity-ready living spaces. What might a longevity living space, a longevity-ready living space look like in an era of climate change? Would it be any different? We know that 45 years ago, psychologist Paul Lawton suggested that older adults are more susceptible to the impacts of their physical environments, something he called the environmental docility hypothesis. We know that older adults are at risk for impacts of climate change. So how do we build not only age-friendly or longevity-ready housing, but in an era of climate change? So we have to simultaneously think about aging and climate change, because we individually and as a global community are facing both of those opportunities and challenges at the same time.
No, exactly. I think the point about longevity in the context of climate change, adds to the complexity. I mean, what would be your response, Sergio? Having had the benefit of the work that you're doing in answer to that question.
Yeah, I like Mick's answer because it brings me to the need for a systemic view of the world. I think we have gone through many decades that we are like short-minded, just like, okay, let me solve this problem and this problem and this problem. We are in a complex world nowadays, more and more complex. We cannot but just solve one problem, denying the other problem. So these greatest problems are very important, as Mick has pointed. But I would just add another thing, which is climate change. There is a lot of science that is saying that it's important. There is a culture change already going on. So culturally, we can see some changing going on. Aging, I think we still have a way to go, right? We are still in the mindset that aging is bad, right? That aging is not good. There is a lot of ageism. There's a lot of people deny, put this problem apart. Still with the old culture, which is the youth is the good. Let's live forever. Let's forever young. So if we do not move from this mindset and to a new mindset, which is okay, I can have strengths and weakness throughout all my life. I just have to understand what's the point that I am in my life, to have my best, to personally and professionally, and in a point of view of organizations and society. What can I get the best from this person, which is 20-year-old or 70-year-old, right? If we do not move to this new mindset, then we are not really addressing the aging problem. We are still seeing that the growing number of 50 plus is a problem.
Yeah.
Why is a problem? It's just a mindset that is old that see this is a problem, right? So I think this is the greatest problem, like to shift to the youth-centric culture that we live in.
That's helpful to underscore that, I think, definitely. Any other observations or comments, Laura, that may have come through?
Yes. After watching the video, what aging innovation are you most excited about, except the one you mentioned, of course?
So Marie, I mean, you've got a great waterfront in terms of some of the ideas that have come through from these young innovators. Is there anything that sort of sparked your interest and excitement particularly?
Gosh, it's just so hard to choose, isn't it? We've had so, I'm thinking about all of our design challenge finalists over the last few years.
Yeah.
And we've had just some really, really wonderful designs. And I think, one of the things that the new map has done, and pairing it with the design challenge is really, opening up this concept of what it means to age and how early that begins. And, I'm really excited about one of the teams from last year. They're actually an ed tech team, which is a term I've become familiar with, education technology. They designed a virtual science lab that is meant to be it's meant to be available for offline use because they're a team that's based out of Nigeria. And Nigeria has very poor internet connectivity in most places. And what they saw during the pandemic was that science education was one of the things that was hurting the most because students didn't have access to labs. And they were like, we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is essentially a huge scientific problem. And yet we're not getting students the science education that they need to sort of deal with these problems in the future. And so they, looked very much at the conditions that they were in and designed for it. And they actually were just selected as one of the top 3 ed tech innovations out of Nigeria by the UK Nigeria Innovation Hub. So I think they're actually going to be coming to London in January.
Great. Well, we'll
so
definitely have to look out for them. Yeah, please do. Please do. We'll definitely like to get in touch and talk to them. But Mick, what about you? You're working intergenerationally. You've probably seen lots of ideas maybe coming through from prompting from your sessions.
Sure. Well, one of the things that struck me in looking at the video was a basic design element. That is, one way to think about human-centered design, the way that my bumper sticker for that is start with people, end with solutions. And that's exactly what that design team did. They went to talk to older people. And I think that's true also when it comes to climate solutions. We need to start talking to people about what are possible solutions in their local communities or in their local organizations and get them asking the questions, how might we think about our organization as a sustainable organization? What might that look like? And just framing it that way with the usual design question, how might we, starts to have a different kind of conversation, both about aging and about entrepreneurship and the environment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what about you, Sergio, from Brazil, in terms of ideas that you're seeing coming through from, unleashing the talent of older people through Labora Tech?
Well, I love one startup that is called Labora.
Obviously. that aside, what else are you seeing? What else are you seeing? You're also a B Corps, and I was wondering whether the influx of the B Corps modus operandi is actually stimulating some new ideas coming through, particularly in terms of the organizational freedom that you can have from that.
No, for sure. I'm just kidding. I think there is one great thing that is happening, that is a lot of organizations dealing with diversity workforce. So not only Labora, but when we talk about aging, we are talking about Black people aging, poor people aging, women, Black people aging, and this is much different, different perspectives and all that. So there are a growing number of organizations that are dealing with that in different ways. One that is about finding people right, like selecting with no bias. Another is touching the culture of companies to how to embrace this diversity. So I think one great thing is to us to go out of our little bubble of a homogeneous answer that we know what's the job description, what's the professional that I expected, and then we blow that and look that the world is much more diverse. And by doing that, we will embrace longevity, because longevity is like an accelerator of the diversity that we have or gain into life. That's the main thing that I get really happy to see happening.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're coming towards the close, and I think one of the final questions was around sort of what are the real kind of challenges here, and I think we've touched on some of them, but I think it's a sort of this personal perspective, but also thinking about it in the wider context too. And I think, Mick, your question around, how do you want to be remembered, and the how might we, and actually thinking about how we inculcate that kind of mindset of thinking more openly and widely about change from our own personal life, but then also how that can impact the wider environment. And I know, Marie, from the from obviously the programs that are emanating now from the new Map of Life work, that's certainly at the heart of how we do this sort of shift change. And you're all involved in organizations who are doing this. But I think just in terms of closing, I'd just like to ask each of you, perhaps how would you like to be remembered in this context, in terms of your own perspectives? I mean, Marie, perhaps I could come to you first, in terms of thinking about longevity and your own contribution from the work that you've been doing.
That's a great question. And what's coming to mind is sort of at the intersection of longevity and sort of all the longevity related issues, including climate change. And that is, one of the things that I try to emphasize the most through my work with the Design Challenge, which is often sort of, the vehicle through which I work, is this issue of reaching the people that sort of, the latest longevity innovations typically don't reach. The latest technology is typically reaching the richest and the best connected. And so, I was really passionate. A couple of years ago, we had our Design Challenge theme was around designing for affordability. And we actually have affordability as one of our criteria every year. And it's something that I really try to emphasize as I promote the Design Challenge. And in any sort of work that we do, we try to, we're trying to thread this throughout the entire new Map of Life, is that we're not just trying to redesign long life, for sort of the 1%, if you will, but really for everybody who doesn't, typically especially those who don't have access to a lot of the innovations
absolutely
that are coming out.
No, well, thank you. That's such a grounding point to make, I think. And Sergio, I mean, you're doing so much already, but is there anything new that you'd like to be remembered for? You got some ideas that you're all sort of waiting to roll out?
Well, I think I see myself as someone who bridges, make bridges in between worlds that are not connected, or people who are not connected before. I think that's the main thing. I mean, and I think the bridge that is still to be done is with the financial market that has to open eyes to really invest into innovation for aging. I think this is the next bridge to be built.
Yes, no, I agree, and I mean, Mick, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but what would you want to leave us with in terms of your perspective?
Well, Julia, my work started with individuals. As a psychologist, I was trying to move individuals and change individual behavior. But increasingly, as I work with groups, I get the question, okay, we can do individual stuff, but what can we do together? What can we collectively do? So we've begun a new project that we call Growing Greener Communities, which really is a collaboration with Strategic Doing organization. Okay. Strategic Doing has for 30 years developed a set of methods that gets people to work on fuzzy boundary, difficult issues that cut across organizational boundaries. But they hadn't worked on climate change. And now together we're working on the Growing Greener Communities effort. So that's our next big thing. But you asked, how would I like to be remembered? That's pretty easy. When my grandkids ask, Pops, didn't you know about climate change? What did you do about it? I want to be able to answer, I did my best.
Well, I think that's a tremendous way to end this conversation. I want to thank you so much for sharing your work, your experience of longevity, social entrepreneurship, and the environment. So thank you so much for joining the panel today. Thank you, Laura, for supporting us in terms of posting information. And I'd really encourage people to look at the resources that we've provided, because it really does take you on further in terms of your understanding, because longevity is about longer, healthier lifespan for everybody. And I think that's an important message that I hope we leave everyone with today. So thank you very much for joining.